the greatest common factor. First, we're just going to practice simplifying a few of these. I'm not going to do all of them. Whatever I do not do, you are going to do on your own before you come to class. But on this first page, on example 1, I'm going to do B and then D. So you are responsible for A and C. Okay, so on here, I have a trinomial that I need to divide by 5x. So I need to take each one of these and divide by 5x. Okay, so first, I'm going to break it down. I have 15x to the third that I need to divide by 5x. Then I have a positive 10x squared that I need to divide by 5x. And then finally 20x divided by 5x. Okay, so let's break it down one at a time. 15 divided by 5 is 3. X cubed divided by x is, well, remember this is from last chapter. When we are dividing our x's, we take our exponents and we subtract them. So that's going to give me x squared. All right, here, 10 divided by 5 is a positive 2. I know I have x's on top and bottom. When that happens, I subtract my exponents. That's going to give me 2x. Finally, 20 divided by 5 is a positive 4. It's the same on top and bottom. 1x on top, 1x on bottom. That means that cancels out. So this x and this x cancel. All right, let's try D. So I need to take each one of these from the top and divide it by negative 2x. So 18x to the fourth divided by negative 2x, 18x squared divided by negative 2x, and then negative 12x divided by negative 2x. So 18 divided by negative 2 is a negative 9. X to the fourth divided by x, I know I subtract my exponents to give me x to the third. 18 divided by negative 2 is a negative 9, so I put a minus 9. X squared divided by x, I subtract my exponents, that's just going to give me x to the first power, which I don't have to write. Finally, negative 12 divided by a negative 2 is a positive 6, so plus 6. 1x on top cancels the 1x on bottom, so those x's cancel. There's my answer. All right, so I want you to practice doing that on A and C. Okay, now what we're going to do on example 2 is we're going to find the greatest common factor of each of the following. So I'm going to do examples B, D, and E. So I have x squared y cubed and then x to the fifth y squared. I want to find the biggest things that both of them have in common. Well, I see they both have x's and they both have y, so I want the greatest common factor. Okay, they both have x's, but this one has x squared. This one's x to the fifth. So I know within both of these, I know they both have x squared. Because this one has 2 x's being multiplied, but also this one actually has 5, but it has at least 2 x's being multiplied. Okay, I see that they both have y's. Y to the third, y squared. Well, what is the biggest y to what exponent do they both have in common? Well, this one has 3, this one has 2, so I know 2 is the biggest that they both have in common, y squared. Okay, D is a little bit different, okay, because not only do we have variables, but we have 28 and 42, so I'm going to find the greatest common factor between 28 and 42. So I'm trying to find the biggest number that I know will go into 28 and 42. So I know that biggest number that goes into 28 and 42 is 14. 14 goes into 28, 14 goes into 42, and I'll show you a trick in a second that you can use the calculator for. Okay, so 14 goes into 28, it also goes into 42, that's the biggest number that will go into both. Okay, now we move on to our variables. Let's look at C first. C to the third, C to the third. Well, they both have c to the third power, so they have that in common. All right, next, d to the second power. Well, if you notice over here, this one is missing that variable of d, so they do not have d in common at all. So I cannot list the variable d as a common factor. This one has it, this one does not, so they do not have it in common. Same thing with e. Okay, This one has e squared. This one does not have an e at all, so e is not in common. Okay, let me show you the trick in the calculator. I know you don't have the calculator at home, so you're going to have to use your brain at home on A and C. But at school, if you would like to use your calculator, I'm going to show you the trick. Okay, if you go on a calculator page, and you're trying to find the greatest common factor between 28 and 42, which is what we just did. If you press Menu, Number, Greatest Common Divisor, and you type in your two numbers, so 28, 42, and press Enter, it'll tell you the biggest number that will go into both of those, 14. So this is just a trick that you can use when you're at school or if you have your own calculator, but use your head when you're at home for now. Okay, let's try E. Okay, so if I want to find the greatest common factor between each of these groups, so they all have to have it in common. So let's look at 75, 100, and 50. Let's think about what is the greatest number that will go into 75, 100, and 50. Well, 25. Some people might be tempted to say 50, but I know 50 does not go into 75. Okay, let's look at our variables. X is first. X to the 5th, X to the 3rd, X to the 2nd. Well, I see they all have X's, so they have that in common, but what is the greatest one? Well, 5, 3, and 2. Well, I know they all have at least X squared. Now let's look at Y's. Y squared, Y to the 4th, Y to the 3rd. Every group has Y's. To the 2nd, to the 4th, to the 3rd. Well, I know they all have at least Y to the 2nd power. Z's. Z to the 1st, Z to the 3rd, Z to the 4th. Well, they all have Z's. And I know they all have at least Z to the 1st power, so that's all I can have. Okay, so calculator again, just to show you. With the calculator, you cannot type in 3 different numbers. So the problem that we just did, menu, number, greatest common divisor. So you can't type in 3. So typically what I try to do is I type in the smallest number with the largest number. So I would have typed in 50, 100. When you do that, it shows you 50. So what you always have to check though is check, does 50 go into your third number, which was 75? So I know it does not. So therefore when that happens, then I try the biggest two numbers. Just 75, 100. And that shows me 25. So I'll always have to make sure that goes into my last number. So my last number was 50. I know 25 does go into 50. So I know that was my greatest common factor. So this is just a tool. It's always better if you can think it through in your head. Excuse me. Now we're going to work on factoring out the greatest common factor. So we're going to find the greatest common factor, and then we're going to pull it out. Okay, so steps to factoring out the greatest common factor. Find the GCF first, what we've been doing. Then what we're going to do is divide each term by the GCF. All right, so first of all, on A, let's just jump right into it. Let's find that greatest common factor first. Okay, so I want to figure out what is the greatest common factor between 10x and 30. Well, I know between 10 and 30, the greatest common factor is 10. 10 goes into 10, it also goes into 30. Okay, x. Is x a common factor? This one has x, this one does not. So x is not a common factor. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this 10 out. It's kind of like working backwards of distributing, right? Okay, so you can divide, or another way I like to do it is I have to think, what do I multiply 10 by to get to 10x? So I know that 10 times x would give me 10x. Done. All right, now I try to think, what do I multiply 10 by to get to a 30? Well, I know 10 times a positive 3 would give me 30. So this is what it looks like to take out the greatest common factor. So it's pretty much the opposite of distributing, right? And you can check yourself by distributing. If I distributed 10 times x is 10x, 10 times 3 is a positive 30, Boom, I know I did it correctly. All right, you can try B on your own. Let's keep moving. Let's see. Let's do D. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to find the greatest common factor. So the greatest common factor between 3, 12, and 27. I'm trying to find the biggest number that will go into all three of these numbers. Well, I know the biggest number is 3. 3 goes into 3, goes into 12, and it goes into 27. Let's see if it has any variables in common. A squared, A, but no A's. So I know A they do not have in common because this one is missing it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take out 3. Okay, and I'm going to think to myself, what do I have to multiply 3 by to get to 3A squared? Well, 3 times A squared is 3A squared. Boom, done with this part. Now I'm trying to get from 3 to 12A. Well, 3 times what would give me 12A? It's 3 times a positive 4A. 3 times 4A is 12A. So I'm done with that middle part. Finally, what do I have to multiply 3 by to get to a negative 27? Well, I know that 3 times negative 9 is a negative 27. Remember, if you want to check yourself, you can always go ahead and distribute just to make sure it does match up correctly. Multiply, that gives me 3A squared, positive 12A. Multiply there, that gives me a negative 27. That does match, so I know I did it correctly. Let's see. Let's do E. Okay, let's find the greatest common factor. All right, first of all, let's look at 30, 15, and 5. I have to think about what is the biggest number that will go into 30, 15, and 5. 5. 5 goes into 5. 5 goes into 15. 5 goes into 30. Now let's look at our variables. A's first. A to the third, A squared, A. I know they all have an A and they all have at least one A. B's next. B squared, B to the third, B. They each have a B, at least one. So my greatest common factor is 5AB. All right, let's factor it out. So 5 times what will give you 30? Well, 5 times 6. A times what would give you A to the third? Well, I have 1, right? So I still need A squared. See how there's 3 A's being multiplied together? A to the third. Okay, I have 1B. B times what would give me B squared? B times B, because there's 2 B's being multiplied together, that's B squared. All right, done with that piece. Let's do the middle. 5 times what would give me negative 15? 5 times negative 3. Now let's look at our variables. A times what would give me A squared? A times A, because I need 2 A's being multiplied together to give you A squared. B times what would give me B cubed? B squared. You see how we have 3 B's being multiplied together? That gives you the B cubed. Finally, this last group. 5 times what is negative 5? 5 times negative 1. Remember, you do not have to put that negative. Oh, yes, you do. Sorry. Because A times what would give you A? Well, you already have your 1A, so you don't need to multiply by any other A's. You already have your 5A, and I'll show you when we distribute out in a second to check ourselves. B times what is B? Well, B times 1, right? You do not need to multiply by any other B's. All right, so let's distribute just to check ourselves. 5 times 6 is 30. A times A squared is A to the third. B times B is B squared. Boom, that matches. To the middle. 5 times negative 3 is negative 15. A times A is A squared. B times B squared is B to the third. That matches. Finally, 5AB times negative 1. Well, I know 5 times a negative 1 is a negative 5. There's only one A between those two and one B between those two. So I know that matches as well, so we did it correctly. Alright, so I'm not going to do F with you, but what I am going to do is I'm going to help you find your greatest common factor, and then the rest is all yours. Okay, so first I'm going to look at 6, 7, and this is a 1, right? So the greatest number that can go to 6, 7, and 1 is 1. So if it's ever 1, you don't really worry about it. Everything has 1 in common. Alright, so now let's look at our variables. X's. X to the 4th, X to the 3rd, X. Well, I see that they all have an X, and they all have at least one X. Y's. Y to the 5th, Y squared, Y. So I see that they all have a Y, but they all have at least one Y. So your greatest common factor is XY. That is what you're going to factor out. Alright, the ones that we skipped, make sure you do on your own and come to class prepared. Alright, bye y'all.